Hello and welcome back, everyone, to Ice Cave Radio. It's been a little bit of time. We had a little break in there. Some travel being done. Charmer's got some travel coming up now, so we're holding down the fort while each of us apparently take turns traveling for a few weeks and being busy with stuff. But we'll try to get as much content for you out as we can. We're getting deep Charmer into Shadows of the Galaxy. People are looking ahead to their Store Showdown season. We just need to catch up a little bit. We haven't chatted for a little while. So how's your SWU life been lately, or lack thereof in my case?
My SWU life has been pretty good. I didn't get to play at locals this week because on the day we normally play Star Wars Unlimited, the local game store did like a big swap meet. So there was a bunch of people who brought stuff. Now, there were folks that were there kind of like buying and selling and trading Star Wars. So cool. That was nice, but we didn't get to play. The week before, you mentioned traveling. You were traveling. I was doing the exact opposite of that. So I hurt my back. That's part of the reason we didn't have an episode, full disclosure. I am getting old. It's a very comical story of how I hurt my back. And
I haven't heard this yet.
Benign.
Okay.
Oh, you haven't? Okay, well.
No, you didn't tell me how this happened. Let's hear it.
I was at home and my wife texted me to say that the topper to the kitty litter had been delivered. She'd ordered one online and she asked if I could just go out and bring it in. Now, mentally, when you hear a kitty litter topper, you're probably like me and you think about like one of those very thin plastic tops that just goes, over to give them a little privacy.
Yeah, sure.
So that's what I was expecting. I made some coffee. I walk outside. I've got coffee in one hand. And I bend over. Bending isn't even the right word. I lean over. Imagine like leaning to your side for a briefcase, right? So we're talking flexing the obliques, if you will, not even like real muscles. And I go to one hand, grab this thing and pick it up. What my wife had not included in the text message was that this was not a normal kitty litter topper. This was this it's really cool in her defense. Very heavy, all wooden, almost like a full-size dog house that is meant to be built and put around a cat litter box to give them privacy.
Hardcore.
It even says on the box, like, 2 people should lift this. Like, it is heavy, but it is not what I was expecting. So again, I'm one-handed, my non-dominant hand tilted to the side trying to do this. Definitely was not doing stretching or anything, not lifting with the legs. And so I picked it up and then I immediately felt my back seize up. I was like, that's not good. The longer time went on, the worse it got. Like I became more and more rigid. I felt like a rusty pocket knife, if you will, where like you just didn't want to open or close. And so I was pretty down for the count. So that's the other reason that we missed. Now, it will be my fault again when we have some interruptions coming up. As you said, I've got more travel coming in mid and late October. But I haven't played much SWU because I wasn't doing anything.
Charmer over there like a battle droid that's lowered off the carrier, but it just won't unfold. I see how it is.
I'm pretty sure Han had more mobility and carbonite than I had most of last week.
You were like, so on a scale of Han and Carbonite to Han just post being tortured in Empire Strikes Back, where were you in terms of physical viability as being able to move
I was
around
beyond. The reason I make the joke I think Han had more mobility and Carbonite is because that is one of the few things that like really, I won't say bothers me, but it always catches my eye is that when he's going down, he's handcuffed and his arms are in front of him. So he goes down, you see the blast, and then he comes up and he's like this.
Yeah.
And all I keep thinking of is like, how did he... So he's got to have some mobility, right?
Han is he's a magician, and he was in the middle of doing that trick where it's like, I can escape the handcuffs, and he was about to go,
and then he
ta-da!
wasn't fast enough.
And that's when
he
the
was
Ugnaughts...
David Blaine.
Yeah, that's right. That's when the Ugnaughts hit the switch and Carbon froze him. He had no idea it was coming. He thought it was just all part of the performance, but poor Han. Han. That's something I've wondered since I was a kid, too. I was like, but wait, how'd he get out of the handcuffs? Like, did the Ugnaughts secretly release it when he got down there?
That one's one of the things that caught my eye as far as like editing. Like I said, blunders, I guess. The only other one that jumps out to me, I can't watch the movie American History X and not see the editing mix up at the end. If you've ever seen that film,
I haven't seen that for a long time. That's not as much fun as Star Wars.
It's not as much fun.
Yeah,
no, it's a little bit
less
different.
fun.
But there's a sequence in a bathroom at the very end of the film with Edward Furlong, and it's featuring him holding some papers, like that he wrote this paper about his experience. And there's an exchange, and in one scene he's like holding the papers, and then it cuts to a person, then it cuts back to him, and the papers are like in the air and floating down, and then it cuts to the person leaving the bathroom, and then when you see him again, he's holding the paper again.
Oh,
right. And it's like they just really wanted to fit in the dramatic like papers floating thing, but didn't care about continuity, and that always drives me nuts too.
Maybe he just imagined them floating. You ever think of that?
Yeah,
it was all a dream. Yep. Well,
yeah.
On that note, I'm glad your back is feeling a little better. You're sitting up. That's the first step, or the first bend. I don't know. Either way,
I have a very nice back support thing behind me. So
cool. You are ambulatory, which is good. You're able to move around again, able to talk about Star Wars Unlimited. And we probably should, because the Store Showdown season is very rapidly approaching. My local doesn't have theirs set up quite yet, but there are some other ones in town here in Los Angeles that I plan on trying to go to. And you and I have been talking a lot about, what decks are we going to play? And we're in the middle of testing. We're still figuring it out. But while we do that, we thought we would do an episode today where we would talk about what are some of the decks you're likely to face at your Store Showdown. What are the archetypes that are seeming to be popular right now? So we settled on 6 decks. And the fun thing with Star Wars Unlimited is I feel like that only scratches the surface, because once again, the meta for this game is so wide compared to like every other card game on the planet right now that we can say these are 6 of the strongest decks in the game, and there's still at least 6 more, if not, more than that you could see too, because this is a game where like the skill of the player really determines victory a lot more than the deck when you compare it to other card games. And so you can take a deck that is quote unquote inferior in terms of card quality and just straight up play it better. Like if you're really good at this one pet deck, you can snag wins where other people wouldn't be able to. So disclaimer on this episode is that these are 6 of the decks we think are likely that you'll see. We think they're 6 of the strongest decks, or at least archetypes for decks, but there's so much out there that you'll have to obviously be a little bit aware of what your local meta is, what the people around you are playing, what you want to play. You don't even need to pick one of these 6 decks to succeed at a Store Showdown either, too. These are just 6 options that we think are most likely to be seen. So, yeah, we'll dive into that. Anything else to add to that premise here that we're setting for the episode?
No, I think that you summed it up pretty well. I would just say that, as you were just saying, these aren't what we think are necessarily the 6 best decks.
Right.
It's more so when you are planning to attend an event, you have to just be aware of what you would expect to see, right? So these are what I suspect are going to be the 6 most likely or most popular. Now, the other caveat I'll add is that a few of these are more like an archetype than a deck, and that will explain itself when we get there, right? So I'm going to talk about a deck, for example, that could really be 3 different decks. Like the leader could change, but it's just the core of the deck is going to be pretty similar. So we're going to cover a lot, I think, of juicy info in this episode.
Yeah, it'll be a good one. I think that's a good point you bring up too, is that these lists, I've kind of compiled them from different places around the internet. Like one of them is like some of my stuff I'm tinkering with. Another one I grabbed off like the Garbage Rollers website. They've got a good meta gauntlet list that I think is a good sort of basic starting point when you want to build a certain deck archetype. There's a YouTube channel out there called Star Wars Dad that I really like. Shout out Star Wars Dad. Randomly, lots of great deck tech videos there too. Lots of slightly wacky stuff as well from time to time, but very well explained. So I've grabbed something from that site too. And yeah, I mean, these lists are just that. They're starting points. When you play this game competitively, you'll notice that the leader can be the same, the base can be the same, but the list itself can vary pretty dramatically, like to the tune of, 6 to 8 cards, which in a 50-card list is a lot. So don't take these lists that will show as like, you must build this exact list and this is the best way to build this leader base combination. It is a good way to build the leader base combination, but it is not at all the only way to build it. So again, that's another caveat with this. And And I don't know. I just love being able to say something like that for a card game too, where it's like, here's the basic, here's a good example of this type of list, but feel free to change it based on what you like to play and what works in your meta, because those are both very good reasons to change things in Star Wars Unlimited. I still haven't given up on Boba 2. I'm gonna make that showcase work, but so it's things like that, right? Where if I practice it enough, I can get wins on it. But let's jump right into it. And what's our first list that we're going to talk about? It is... Oh, okay, here we go. So I grabbed this list. This was from a big tournament in Sweden recently, and I thought this is a good example of a deck that's very popular right now, which is the Double Cunning Boba Fett from Set 1 leader deck. And this is just a deck that does a very good job of tempoing. It has a lot of event tricks to either deal a little bit of damage or recur, bring back some cards, and then you've got some great stuff like the Hotshot Blaster too, to provide some surprise late game damage or some surprise damage when you need to be able to take out a unit with another unit that would otherwise be seen as inferior for that task. So this is kind of the evolution of a deck that was popular already in set number 1. But man, we got a ton of Bounty Hunter support in Shadows of the Galaxy, right? So I feel like this is, before it was all Boba Fett green. And I think Boba Command is still, Boba 1 Command is still a really good way to run this leader. But in my opinion, I think Double Cunning Boba Fett is the best version of Boba Fett at the moment, because of all the Bounty Hunter support and the events like A New Adventure and McClunky and stuff like that. What do you think?
I think that Double Cunning Boba is certainly going to be the most popular version. I don't know that I would say it's the most powerful, because you and I were just talking before we started recording. I think that the red version is a bit slept on. The more I see it, the more I really like what it does in the meta. But again, when you're talking about planning for an event, you should expect this to be somewhere in the field. And
for sure,
if it's not this exact version, so this is also a great one to start with, because we can talk about those differing genres, right? If it's not the exact version you're seeing on the screen, or if you're listening, hearing us talking about the Bounty Hunter version, there are still versions floating around that go a little less heavy on the Bounty Hunter theming and just more traditional raw power. So the list that we have on screen, if you're listening for the audio, does have cards like the Bounty Guild Initiate, does have cards like
Toro Calican,
the Mercenary Gunship, A New Adventure, Toro Calican. These are all cards that usually you see in the Bounty Hunter version, because you also want to be a bit more aggressive, a bit more low to the ground. There is still quite a bit of folks piloting a more mid-rangey version. And what's funny is this looks like it can transition to that, because the sideboard has the cards that a lot of people are running in the main deck. So specifically, I see 3 copies of Bodhi Rook and 3 copies of the TIE Phantom in the sideboard. There are a lot of Boba lists that are still just running those in the main. But overall, this, or some version of this, right, is something that I would absolutely expect to see at a Store Showdown.
Yeah, when I was looking at different Boba Fett lists, and I've played a pretty good amount of Double Cunning Boba myself over the months, and I really liked this list in particular because it has a lot of the core kind of classic things that worked well in Boba Fett. One thing that jumps out at me is a Viper Probe Droid. That's a card that a lot of people have cut in set 2. And I don't think it needs to be cut. It's still such a great first drop in the game, right? Because you get this 3/2 that trades very well into whatever your opponent is playing, and you get to look at their hand. And getting to look at your opponent's hand on turn 1 is extremely powerful for a deck like this that plans on trying to kind of like tempo out in the mid game, right? You can look at their hand and be like, all right, well, I know they're going to draw more cards, but based on this, I have a rough idea of, how they might be planning to play out the next couple turns, and then I can mess with that, right? So glad to see the Viper Probe Droid. I'm actually kind of glad to see them go down to 2 legendary Boba Fett units from set 1. It's a good unit, but it is a little bit clunky in actual practical use. So I don't mind seeing that go down to 2 and see, more room being made for things like Toro Calican, right? Which you can get, more consistent benefit from. It's another 3/5 for 3. It's going to have that opportunity to attack twice per turn sometimes, depending on if you can play another bounty hunter. So I actually don't mind at all seeing the legendary Boba Fett go down to 2 copies. I feel like a month or two ago, people would be like, blasphemy, but I actually think that's a nice little adaptation with this list in particular. And this tournament, if I recall correctly, was a pretty massive tournament. So to take fourth in that with this list is pretty good. And what you shouted out earlier, having Bazine Natal, Bodhi Rook, Lurking TIE Phantom, and Change of Heart in the sideboard. The Change of Heart's pretty standard for sideboards for Double Cunning, especially Boba. But the other stuff, yeah, a lot of people would love to run that in the main board. I agree that I like it in the sideboard because it's more specific, right? You can have Bodhi Rook just be a dead card in your hand a lot of times if you're playing against a list that doesn't run a lot of events, you know? Then you're just playing a vanilla 3/3 for 3. So, yeah, you know, take that out, and I would say even the Waylays, normally you would see the Waylays in the sideboard and Bodhi Rook in the main board. I think in a general sense, the Waylay is going to be a card you can sort of weave into your play in a useful sense in more games on average, more game ones of a best of 3 on average than the Bodhi Rook. So I really like the way the main board and the sideboard are constructed too. That was a shout out I was planning to make too. But yeah, again, you can make a lot of changes. There's double cunning Boba lists that look very different from this and are still successful. But I thought this was a good example of the type of thing you're going to be expecting to see at a Store Showdown. Because I guarantee you, if you go deep enough, you're in a Store Showdown, you're probably going to end up playing against the Set 1 Boba Fett. It's still one of the most popular leaders in the meta. So you gotta be ready, you know?
Yeah, and what I love about this is you can, just by looking at the deck list, kind of see the story of what they were going for. This is a list that looks like it was designed very specifically to beat aggro and other mid-range lists. And then the sideboard is constructed in a way where you bring all of that stuff in against ramp or hard control.
Right.
The Bodhi and the Bazine are hand disruption. So obviously you can maybe get rid of a late game card or something that they were trying to sit on. The Phantom has, in my opinion, the best value against vigilance decks where they're trying to just remove it with direct removal. So you kind of put a thorn in their side. And honestly, a lot of vigilance decks, one of mine that you'll see later, don't run a lot of early space units because they're relying on that removal. And so the Phantom can be a little bit of a problem there.
Yeah.
But as you said, they are also situational. So choosing to include those in the sideboard and instead just focus on a very consistent early game is probably, you know, the plan when you look at this, and it was probably why it was really successful as well.
Right. Yeah. Makes me want to run it right now. So anyway, there's a look at the Double Cunning Boba. Definitely a list you'll have to keep an eye out for at your Store Showdowns. I have these just kind of thrown in obs in no particular order, so I have no idea what's coming next. Let's find out. It is Bosk Blue. So this is a list I pulled from that YouTube channel that I talked about, Star Wars Dad. And this is a list that's been popping up more often in my locals, actually. So I've gotten a chance to play against this a couple times lately. And I think it's pretty strong. It's a list that's kind of newer on the scene. Bosk Green was doing well earlier, and then just in the last couple of weeks, Bosk Blue has started to emerge as sort of the dominant Bosk. You could still see Bosk Command. A lot of people still run it, but this Bosk Blue one is definitely a deck you need to be aware of. It's much more on the control side of things, as you can see, and if you're listening, because it's got like the Super Laser Blast, Snoke, Devastator, Crate Dragon, all the removal you can imagine, right? In blue, it's got things like Lieutenant Cheldson for early blocking. But the thing that makes this deck very annoying to play against is that it combines a lot of that blue removal with a lot of the bounties, and especially with things like the client or saving top target for when you get Bosk out. This deck is, in my opinion, one of the more consistent decks at capitalizing on Bosk's flip ability, where you get to claim the bounty twice. There's been games where I played against this deck and I'm like, I don't know how to beat this. Like, I mean, I'm an aggro player, so obviously, I'm going to have a harder time into this one anyway, but it just felt like this deck had the game so locked down. But, in a way where you've got some units on there, it still feels a little bit more interactive. So I will say this deck is kind of fun to play against too, but, this list too, the sideboard is kind of crazy. I would look at that sideboard and I would say, okay, maybe take a few of those and go up to 2 ofs and 3 ofs. I don't recommend having a sideboard filled with 1 ofs. I think that sideboard on the screen right now is a good example of cards you could put in the sideboard, and you want to make a choice and narrow it down based on your local meta. But overall, I think this list is really fun to play. It's actually pretty fun to play against, but more than anything, for a Store Showdown, it's strong. Have you run into this yet in any of your locals?
No, I have heard people talk about it, but nobody has actually brought it yet. And if I'm being honest, I think part of the reason that's the case is that this is a bit expensive to build.
That is true.
The top end is extremely legendary heavy, and not everybody at my locals has like full play sets of everything yet. So I suspect that's the reason.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I mean, it is. You need, 3 Vigilance, 3 Super Laser Blast, 3 Snoke, 3 Devastator, 3 Crate Dragons. So it is very legendary heavy. If you can put it together, though. Yeah.
Yeah. For the audio listeners, Avenger, not Devastator.
Avenger. Oh, did I say Devastator? Okay, I meant to say Avenger. Yeah. My bad.
big starship. But I didn't want anyone going, all right, if it's Boss Blue, why they have the command one in?
I know. All right, my bad. I didn't get much sleep last night. It is Avenger, which if you're unfamiliar, Avenger is the one that when it comes into play, it defeats a unit. On attack, it defeats a unit. So it's just a great late game lockdown. I mean, you play any of these. Snoke against aggro. There's 2 of in main board because, the other 2, Avenger and Crate Dragon, work just fine against that too. But both Avenger and Crate Dragon are sort of like checkmate cards, is what you can kind of call them. You play that, and it's very rare when your opponent will have a solid answer, So, yeah, this deck, again, I think one of the best decks out there. It's just surviving long enough to play those checkmate cards. And, it's cool. Ruthless Raider is a neat addition in the sideboard, by the way. Good body and space, and then that damage can actually make a difference from time to time when it comes to trying to claim a bounty when Bosk is out. So, yeah, don't sleep on Ruthless Raider in this deck, too. Yeah. Anything more to add to that?
No, I don't think so. It's doing all of the things that you would expect it to do. The only thing that I would say is that there's perhaps, at least in this one, more red than I would have expected. As weird as that sounds, just because you usually want some Childson consistency, but other than that, it's interesting because like the leader ability is pretty strong with Bosk, right? And so being able to just give yourself the ability to get that free damage in with your leader for doing things that you're already going to get a payoff for, I think is really important. And I think people specifically pairing it with blue don't realize how easy it is because the client is very annoying and typically pretty hard to get rid of. And he's like a mini Java leader, right? He can just hand out bounties and then Boss can start pinging stuff. So it's one of those lists that I think is deceptive in terms of how easy it is to actually get value out of Bosk.
Yeah. The client is kind of the MVP card of this deck. It is incredibly annoying to remove. Unless you play blue yourself, right? But it can heal so much. Very regularly, I would see the Bosk or myself playing the Bosk would be down to 0 damage on base by the flip turn, which against an aggro deck is basically just a win. So yeah, definitely a deck to watch out for. I think this is one of the newer ones in the list that we put together today, but it's coming up. It's coming up really fast, and you need to be aware of this deck for sure. All right, moving on to deck number 3. It's going to be another deck with Vigilance, and that is going to be kind of a through line, I think, with a lot of the decks in set 2. Vigilance has kind of emerged as probably the strongest individual color in the game right now, and so a lot of decks will use that, mostly for the sake of the removal that it offers, but in the sake of Han 2 Blue. So this is set 2 Han Solo, the play a unit from your hand, it costs 2 less or 1 less, deal 2 damage to it. In the case of this, you're just going to be able to ramp to some of those big units that we get in set 2, but also have those removal options too. Do you want to go over this one a little bit?
Yeah, so this is a really fun list simply because there is a lot of flexibility. You can be very aggressive at times with it. And you can also carry yourself pretty reasonably into a late game state where you can position yourself to win when you are not the beatdown, right? This is a list that is almost like the best definition of what good mid-range is for Star Wars Unlimited. It's fast enough to beat some of the slower decks, but has enough control elements where you have game into the decks like Sabine, for example.
Yeah.
Specifically, the stuff that helps you be aggressive are cards like Sabine, just the unit. You have the Green Squadron A-Wing, which is still fantastic. You've got Cassian, you've got K2SO. I love the inclusion of main deck 3 copies of Pillage along with Poe, so that you can also, when you are the aggressor, disrupt their hand and then continue to press the advantage. But when you're playing against a deck that might be even lower to the ground than yourself, like a Sabine, having options available like you've got the Concord Dawn Interceptors to help stall in space. You've got the Restored Arc and Yoda that are going to give you access to restore. Obi-Wan and Luke are good late game bombs that can help you stabilize. 2 copies of Redemption. Redemption is also pretty fantastic because you can play it at a discount with Han, and even if you take the damage but you still want the Sentinel, you can still gain a healthy amount of life, but doing so a turn early is sometimes so crucial, right? Sideboard also provides a lot of flexibility in terms of, do I want to be more late game oriented, or do I want to be a bit more aggressive? And the aggressive include, I mean, you could bring it in, but the aggressive inclusion, I think personally, is like an open fire where you're trying to press your advantage and just remove stuff. But the rest of it is almost always going to be the cards that you want to bring in if you are trying to slow things down, with the exception of that 3rd copy of Crate Dragon. That's another card that I think comes in if you're playing as the aggressor, just because it's a finisher that you can really capitalize on when it comes down. But just overall, really solid mid-range deck. You've got all of the all-stars. You've got Poe, Obi-Wan, Luke Skywalker, 2 copies of Wrecker, Redemption, as I said, Rey. Rey actually gets a decent amount of mileage in this list because of cards like Baze in the sideboard, for example.
Well,
but also Rey's just a good, yeah. Well, I was gonna say the healing, and Rey's just a good body, especially when you can play her as a 4/5, but as a 4-drop. That's a lot of upside.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like getting to play Kanan in this list without having to do 2 damage to Kanan when he comes out, you know. And the fact that she can heal on attack is really nice too. You're not going to get the shield token out of Rey because basically everything else has heroism already, except for like the Baze or the Crate Dragon. I guess you could put a shield on Crate Dragon, right?
Hey.
But yeah, I mean, well, if you have Rey and the Crate Dragon out, you've already won the game. So the shield's not going to be a big difference maker there. But I think it's a good include. Yeah. It's another one of those lists too that you're gonna see it a lot, because I personally feel like this is an easier version of Han to pilot than Set 1 Han. There was the kind of crazy Set 1 Command Han, the Casino Han that played a lot of the 7-drops really fast and really early, and that was a tougher deck to play. Where this one, it's kind of just like, all right, I get my discount, here's a big unit, you know. And so if you're looking for something to play, and you don't have a ton of time to prepare, I am of the opinion that this is a good list to choose. I would imagine there's some Han Blue players out there that are like, no, it's the most skillful deck on the planet. And every deck requires a certain amount of skill. But I do think the skill floor is what I'm talking about here with this deck is a little bit lower than some other ones. It's easier to jump in and succeed with it than some of the other lists we're talking about. So it's a good choice in that regard too, I think. You agree, or do you want to just let me take the heat for that?
No. I mean, I agree, just because it is, you know, again, when you kind of talk about mid-range as an archetype, beyond just Star Wars Unlimited, right? The term mid-range comes obviously from a long line of other card games, and a lot of times when you hear people describe mid-range, they will say that you're just trying to play the most powerful thing you can on curve and capitalize as a result. And this is, again, like a poster child for that. All of the cards included in this list do something powerful, and especially if you play them on curve, and then when you add your leader ability in where you can play them potentially at a discount, then you're just reaping additional rewards. It just really, really gives you a lot of power advantage that you can capitalize on even if you're unfamiliar with the list.
Yeah, it's Value Town for sure. Notable mention, there's some Han 2 decks out there that do run green and will swarm you as well. So I feel like you see a little bit of that here and there, but this is going to be, I think, the Han 2 list that you see the most at your Store Showdowns. So worth a mention there. All right, moving on. That's not a list. That's our Padme list from last time. That's not the one we're talking about. You're not going to see that there. We'll edit that out. Maybe. No, that was funny. Leave it in. Here's another list that Charmer loves to include. Now, people may be surprised, Charmer, that it's Iden sitting there and not Kira. But you are of the opinion that there's some similarities there. But you want to talk through the two leaders and how this fits.
There's funny. There's some. Man, my brain is going a mile a minute here because there's so much I want to say. First of all, it's not actually even just 2 leaders I want to talk about here. It's 3. This is really a deck that's 3 decks in a trench coat. Sure. I just prefer playing the Iden version, but the reality is you can take the list that is on screen, and for our audio listeners, I'm going to talk through it. You could take 40 cards from this and change it to Krennic. You could take 40 cards from this and change it to Kira. The core of this is pretty much the same, but there are different ways to approach it. Iden, I think, is the least popular, but it's the one I enjoy the most. So selfishly, I'm going to talk through this. But again, the reality is the most popular one that you're going to see is likely Kira, but I have seen still a fair amount of Krennic floating around because he's just a good sticky body that has Restore and still gives you access to Vigilance, Villainy, and Command, but also not just Command, Energy Conversion Lab. Really, that's the list, right? The leader is almost irrelevant in most cases. It's literally just, are you playing Vigilance, Villainy with Energy Conversion Lab, and how are you exploiting it? So with that being said, most of these decks are going to include stuff like Colonel Yularen, Infernal 4, Pike Sentinel, Power of the Dark Side is incredibly common. The Client, the Super Laser Technician, aka DJ Death Star, Takedown, Overwhelming Barrage is still a hell of a card. Clan Saxon Gauntlet, Rivals Fall, Darth Vader, Avenger. Like I said, you could take about 40 cards from this and put it into Kira. You could put it into Krennic and then just make whatever changes you want. This particular flavor differs a bit because it is, again, this is a pet project of mine, but it's trying to take advantage of Imperial synergy a bit, but also it's trying to take advantage of early game officials to turn on Emperor's Royal Guard.
I like that.
So where this list differs from some others, I am including in the 2 slot 3 copies of the Scanning Officer.
I love
because
that,
it's
by
an
the way.
Imperial.
Underrated card. Underrated card by a
it has utility.
Yeah.
Also, it's green, so it's going to turn on your Colonel Yularen. But again, it gives you a good 2-drop that you can use to potentially turn on your Royal Guard. A lot of people like to run Pyatt in this spot. I just don't like the 1/4 body, and specifically in this list, there's not a lot of stuff that he's really going to give ambush to that is relevant. Yeah. Your Darth Vader already has ambush, so you're really just looking at Clan Saxon Gauntlet and Avenger, and then Relentless in the sideboard. So if I prefer the 2/3 body and the when played utility of the Scanning Officer, why not just run it anyway is kind of where I was at.
I love the Scanning Officer. That's I feel like that's such an underrated card. A lot of people don't realize that if you hit something with it, the new resource that comes in is exhausted. Because of course it is. That's the rules. But
when a lot of resources enter play, they enter exhausted.
Yeah, a lot of people miss that, and in that they're like, oh, I just need to. It's too hard to like target a specific smuggle thing with a specific deck. I'm like, there's a good amount of smuggle in a lot of decks. If you hit anything, they're just down on resources. You know. That's strong.
I mean, that's really it. It's just, I want to hit it. And it's, I think that's the other thing. A lot of people also say like, well, on turn 1, it doesn't feel great because they don't have 3 things to choose from or whatever. But I say that turn 1's the best time when you're trying to gain tempo.
Absolutely.
Because this is the scenario, right? If you have initiative, you can slam down Scanning Officer, and if they drew their 6 cards and did what most players do, they go, oh, this has Smuggle. I'll put that down right now.
Yep.
And then you hit it, just like Doa said, it will enter exhausted, and then unless they have a 1-drop or something, you probably just made them have to skip their first turn entirely, and that is also really strong no matter what deck you're playing. So I've fallen in love with the card, and that was what made me then start to lean into some of the other cards. Like I said, this does have a bit of a different feel to it. It's got an Imperial feel, so because I'm running that, and it's an Imperial and an official, I'm obviously running Emperor's Royal Guard, but I'm also running 3 copies of General Veers, which is a bit of a departure for some people as well. Mm-hmm. And I really like it because there's a lot of Imperials here, and he's an official, so he turns on the Royal Guard, but giving yourself extra trade value, I think, is really important. The other reason I've personally kind of fallen in love with him is that in Vigilance Mirrors, having him is akin to having Dodana when you're playing Sabine, in that it takes one of your best units outside of takedown range. And in this case, that unit is the client. Mm-hmm. Being able to jam the client on 3, and then if you have initiative, or you can do it in the reverse order, but if you jam the client on 3, and then if you have initiative, play Veers, he now has 6 health. They can't take him down. So just like you protect your Sabine with Dodana, he protects your client, which is usually a pretty big deal for you, because the shield is annoying for them to deal with, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the more like top end inclusions, it's really just the 5 drops. I have 1 copy of Gideon and 2 copies of Rook. I'm actually in the process of trying to move it around because I want to get a 2nd copy of Gideon in here somehow. I just haven't figured out where yet. I like both of these cards specifically with Energy Conversion Lab. Rook becomes, just removal that you can ambush in, and then you get a nice big body left over. He also is a very clean answer if you are going to the insane late game to something like Crate Dragon or some of the other bigger units, because again, he's got the shielding, come in and remove it. The Gideon is really helpful against aggressive lists because, again, he's a 5/5 for 5, but if he ambushes, he can take something out, and then you can give experience tokens out, which a lot of times you can then give to something else. And then when you flip your Iden, you can start getting experience tokens on her, and against aggressive decks, it basically just wins you the game because they can't get rid of her effectively. So I've been a big fan of him in the aggro matchups, and I'd like to fit a 2nd one in somewhere. Sideboard is really just trying to shore up the game against other late game decks, right? So 3 copies of Resupply, 3 copies of Relentless. You're just trying to ramp into Relentless or Avenger first.
Right.
A 3rd Rival's Fall, and then I still have Regional Governor because it's an official there, but also it can name key removal against the late game decks. I could very easily see that card swapped to something else. If you like Snoke, or if you like Supreme, or not Supreme, Super Laser Blast, etc., then it could be those as well.
I like it. I like a regional governor. I had a lot of fun with it in set number 1. It's one of those cards that like just value. It's the value goes up the more you know the game, and so you can really mess with people with it. So I like that that's included there, because I would see tons of matchups where you bring that in. For instance, if there's a matchup where the Scanning Officer, for a fact, is just never going to hit anything in a certain list, well, bring in regional governor, and you can kind of target them in the same way that it denies them a play. So it's swappable in that way. I think the body's a little bit weaker, but I do like that. Yeah,
body is weaker, but it does also have the traits that you're looking for, right? It's Imperial and official.
Exactly. Yeah. Cool. It's a neat list. And again, like the Kira list does function fairly similarly. You'll probably see some Kiras instead of Idens, I would say, but again, I think a lot of the things that you described are going to be true regardless of which blue Imperial leader you're going to see. So,
yeah, like I said, you could take 40 cards of this. In this particular instance, it's like you change out Scanning Officer, General Veers, and probably like the Gideon and the Del Micos I know are not as popular. I'm a big fan of Del Mico because, again, I like the disruption. But those are probably the like 9 to 10 cards most other lists will have different. But the rest of it is pretty cookie cutter, whether it's Kira or Krennic or Iden.
Yeah, exactly. All right, moving on. This is the mall list. I thought I deleted those. I swear I went through our folder and deleted. This is the list from our Commander Rex episode. Or Commander Cody episode rather. Forget that. Not gonna see that. You will see though some Palpatine command though. The double command Emperor Palpatine from set 1. That's a list that's kind of grown in popularity over time. And for good reason, too. It's got a good amount of ramp in it. It can run command. It can run resupply. And it does a bit of what we just talked about. But it does it in sort of a more straight-up control sort of fashion, where you're doing a little bit of healing early on, and then you've got things like traders to steal units. You're very quickly ramping to like the Darth Vader, the Reinforcement Walker, Relentless, Devastator. That time it's right. It actually is Devastator. And so this is a list where you're going to run the risk of going to time a lot if you're not super familiar with it. And when you're playing against somebody, I would say don't be surprised if your match goes to time and you want to try to play a little bit quicker with that one. But it can be very effective at just sort of like shutting the game down and outlasting your opponent and then coming in with some pretty hard to deal with threats in the end. So definitely a deck I've seen a lot lately. Have you seen this one pretty frequently too?
I have, yeah. Or at least, versions of it. The double green Emperor Palpatine is, I think, a deck that most people are going to expect to see if your locals don't traditionally have many aggressive decks. The idea is if games are going to go a little bit later, then you just want to be the person who has the best late game, right? You want to be the apex predator of the end game. And I don't think that there's any list that does it better than double green Palpatine, giving you access to so much ramp, but also the ability for Palpatine to steal somebody else's big late game unit, the ability for you to play things like Devastator, where you're going to 2-for-1 big units, etc., is such a big deal. So yeah, there are certainly versions of this that I have run into.
Yeah, things like Relentless too can just shut down the control matchup because they just straight up, can't afford to play 2 events per turn if they're looking at playing something like a Rival's Fall. So it does have a lot of good ways late game to shut down, and it has a lot of ways to get there quick. So yeah, definitely a control list to watch out for. The sideboard is even more control oriented in this particular list, where you've got things like Palpatine's or Emperor's. Yeah, Palpatine's Return there. That lets you bring some of the big stuff back. You've got the Maul for a little bit more of the aggressive matchups there. But then you've got things like Fell the Dragon as cheap removal for, Great Dragon, things like that. I'm not totally sold on the strike through or strike true rather in this particular list in the sideboard. I think that's one of the cards where you're still gonna struggle a little bit maybe to find a consistent use for it. But I'll go back to what we said earlier, where these are good examples of starting points for these lists, where these are versions of this hero or leader rather in base that have found success, but you don't need to stick to them card for card. And if I was going to play this, I think I would probably change out the strike trues to something else. But that's just me.
Yeah, they feel like they're a little out of place just because you don't have a ton of very high power cards. You do have the lackeys. The lackeys are probably going to be your best target in most cases because they're going to come online early, and then you can use that as a nice follow-up if you don't have something like a Barrage. I think my biggest issue is that if I'm playing a lackey on 4, I'm hoping that I'm just playing Barrage on 5 anyway. So I struggle to see like when I would want to bring that in, and even more so I would almost say that something like a good capture card or
totally.
Some other version of removal makes sense. You do also have access to command, for example, where you're trying to deal damage to other units as a potential choice on it. So you already kind of have that ability covered. So I'm with you. I feel like that one feels a little weird in this list, but
I'd probably replace that with Take Captive if I had to just pick a card off the top of my head right now. Just because that's another one where it's like it only costs 3, so they play, you have one of your big units out, they play Great Dragon, you just take it captive, and like either your base or that unit takes 3 damage. It doesn't really matter. So I think that'd be a good sideboard inclusion there. But either way, I think a good double command Palpatine list to look at and be ready for. And again, like Charmer mentioned, if you're playing against this, you're just going to want to go as aggressive as possible with most decks, just because if you can finish it off early, then that's going to be your best bet to avoid a lot of those late game bombs and things like overwhelming barrage, all that stuff. If you can't, you're just going to get outvalued late game, you know? So if you're going to take it down at all, you pretty much have to do it quick. IMO.
I say instead of the strike trues, it should just be endless legions.
Endless legions? That's spicy. Gonna go all the way to 14 resources. I mean, this is a deck that can do that. Sure.
You're potentially, with more so than any other deck, gonna get there with this, especially with the resupplies and the super lasers, and it's gonna have as much value most of the time as strike true.
Sure.
But you also and the reason I bring it up is because whenever I think about endless legions, Admiral Pyatt is like the linchpin, in my opinion, because he's what makes it become like the auto win. So being able to play Pyatt first, because you get to choose the sequencing, and then you start playing cards like Devastator, where you can hit with Overwhelm, and suddenly you get a lot of burst damage. So
yeah, okay, sure. I could see that maybe. I think Take Captive is going to be a little bit more stable of a choice. But,
for sure.
But I think
or even
Endless
like
Legions,
Legal Authority, if
I like Legal Authority a lot for the late game capturing power with this, because that's where the higher power units are going to come in, which is kind of a requirement for Legal Authority. But that one, unless you're really trying to do tricks with like the unit power, I prefer Take Captive still, just because the upgrade removal is there, you know? But that said, Legal Authority does give you the most flexible version of capture. So if you need to cross over the arenas, that's a really good reason to include it.
Yeah, I was just thinking that if you have played Relentless and then you start playing Legal Authority on it, nobody's getting those units back. You know what I mean?
that is true. Hey, well, disabling TIE Fighter or disabling Fang Fighter. There you go. That can do it.
That is a card.
Yeah. You know, but the thing is like, even if the upgrade is removed, I don't think the unit that was captured by Legal Authority is freed. I was thinking about that, and I just looked at it. Yeah. It just says, when played, attached unit captures an enemy non-leader unit with less power than it. Yeah, so never mind. Even if you take out the upgrade, it doesn't free the unit that was captured by it earlier. So forget what I said earlier. I think Legal Authority is still good. The only like speed bump to get over is just making sure that you have more power, right?
Right.
Yeah, which you're not really going to get in this deck until late game, because your early stuff is going to be in the way. It's going to be officials, it's going to be sentinels, but it's not going to have that power buff to steal things unless you like give stuff XP with command, you know? So
here's another case for Legal Authority. If you're not playing it till you have big power anyway, the fact that it's cheaper means you're more likely late game to pair it with something.
Sure.
So on like a turn 6, you could play Lackeys and then Legal Authority, and because it's one cheaper than Straight True, it comes online better. But also, you can play Legal Authority and just not get the when played. So another thing that I think is lost about Legal Authority a lot of times during evaluation is that, yes, obviously the best play is to capture something, but it's not dead in your hand. If there's nothing to capture or whatever, you can still just use it for the health buff. So that's still better than Strike True.
I mean, still better than Strike True. Maybe better than Take Captive in certain situations. I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit here because I actually love Legal Authority. I've been putting it in decks a lot, especially all my Boba 2 lists have Legal Authority in it because he gives plus power to things, so it makes it easier to sneak out a capture with that. And then they have the extra 2 HP. I'm one of the people that, like, when I saw Legal Authority was one of the promo cards, I was like, oh, sweet, I love Legal Authority. And everyone else was like, what, Legal Authority? So I do think it is a generally underrated card. I was actually just talking about that in our Discord today. So, yeah, I think it's a good include here, too. But let's move on to our next deck in the list. Yes, the classic Sabine ECL. You and I have both played a lot of this kind of list. I definitely leaned more towards the Sabine Cunning, which, to be fair, I didn't experiment a lot with in set number 2, but it's generally thought to be weaker than Sabine ECL right now. And I think that's probably correct, just because being able to ECL Poe Dameron and Wrecker, I think just that right there makes green the better color to pair with Sabine right now. So that's why we're including it. And this is the preeminent aggro list in the format. This could be the best deck in the format, just in general. You'll see a couple cards changed here and there. This list is not the list. This is my list at the moment. I made a couple changes to a tournament list I found a couple weeks ago. I don't remember where I found it. Made a couple alterations, but this is generally what you're going to see if you're going to run into Sabine ECL, with a few exceptions.
Yeah, this is, again, one of those situations where the core 40 is going to be the same, and then you're going to run into different flavors. It's just, with this one, it's always going to be Sabine ECL. You're not going to have the leader swaps like you do with the Vigilance Villainy ECL lists. This is a deck that just wants to do as much damage as possible, so all your early game stuff has a lot of value. Battlefield Marine, Green Squadron, A-Wing, Sabine, they all swing for 3 as a 2-drop, which is really important. You've got cards that allow you to generate board presence while also buffing other units, whether that's Fleet Lieutenant, where they buff for the attack, or Wing Leader, where they just buff so that you're kind of splitting your threats. And then you've got cards that allow you to generate either instant damage or pseudo instant damage. So what I mean by that is cards like Cassian, where if you smuggle him out, he enters ready. So if you have situations where your opponent has already passed for the turn, that's pseudo instant damage because they can't stop it. Or if you are using Energy Conversion Lab with units that have either an on attack or overwhelm. So the big 3 in this list are K2SO, Poe Dameron, and Wrecker. Then you can generate a lot of damage that way as well. And then, of course, we all know For a Cause I Believe In is traditionally your staple finisher.
Yeah.
That's just going to be the same throughout most versions of this list. And the only thing that's going to really vary from list to list is going to be some of your, what I'll describe as like tech inclusions. And I don't mean the character or the card tech. What I mean is in trading card games, if you're new, the phrase a tech card usually means you bring it in to do something very niche or specific. So your list, for example, you've got the Timely Intervention, which I'm a fan of. You've got like Heroic Sacrifice in the sideboard, etc. Those would be considered one of the tech choices because that will not be the same throughout. Whereas in my versions, I'm still running Spec Force Soldier as a tech option. I like getting rid of Sentinel, and I like pairing that with Bright Hope because it's a great thing to play, get the when played, and then when you play Bright Hope, you can bounce him because he's a low cost and then replay him. That sort of thing. But again, not every list is running Spec Force Soldier still. So again, that's where you'll see the fluctuations are more so in the situational cards as opposed to the core power.
Yeah, and like I'm not even totally sold on this list myself either. Like the Sundari Peacekeeper, you know, I don't even know if I really like that in the sideboard. I think I like to bring it in to ECL it for a little bit of healing, like the Mirror maybe, that kind of thing. I'm not a big fan of Metal Ceremony either. That's something where I've still kind of gone back and forth about maybe swapping it out for like another Timely Intervention main deck, or just like, you know, Clone Deserters or something like that. You know, it's something to just add a little bit more meat to it. But you know, just in general, this is sort of, again, the list that you'll probably see. You might see a list with only 2 Darksabers like me, because I only own 2 Darksabers. So that's all I can put in.
Too.
I've been searching far and wide, but I still have only managed to get 2 Darksabers. But that's just the way it is sometimes.
So I will say, if you're probably like me. I have a hard time cutting Metal Ceremony too. I really like the card, but I realized that what was keeping me on it was I was so used to playing the yellow, the Cunning version of Sabine, and it's much better in that list because you can potentially play it for free with Ezra. And once I remembered I don't have Ezra, I've come down on my ceremony count anyway.
See, I never ran it in Cunning Sabine at all. I've just never been a big fan of that card because it just feels inconsistent to me. And maybe that's just my own personal experience. I just haven't had a lot of great Metal Ceremony turns. But, you know, it was always standard, at least in the green list. So I'm giving it a try. And here we are, you know. But yeah, so you'll almost certainly see this list. It seems like every big tournament right now, there's a Sabine ECL list that like top 4s, top 2s wins, you know. You are not going to win a Store Showdown, I think, without having to face at least one of these, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah. All right. Is that it? Yes, that was it.
That was it. That was our last one.
That was all 6 lists. And again, like, there's so much more. There's so much more to talk about. There are Cad Bane lists out there that people are playing. There's somebody in our Discord right now that is really championing a double red Bo-Katan list. We didn't even mention Kylo Ren.
I was going to say double red Kylo Ren. It pops up at my locals.
Cunning Kylo Ren is also pretty popular right now. I mean, we could just go on. Like I said, there's at least double that number of decks that are out there. Original Han Solo 1. There's a double Cunning Han Solo list that people like, and then you've got all the pet decks out there that that people are just good at because they played it so many times and they just know their matchups well. Like me on Boba 2, right? I think I can do pretty well on that list, even though it's definitely not a top meta list right now. So. Again, this is just sort of like a taste of what are probably 6 of the most common lists you're going to see at your Store Showdowns. Keep an eye on your locals. You'll have a better idea about what way they sort of lean than we do. But that's kind of the general thing I think that you can expect. And at the same time, I think that's kind of a general baseline for if you're looking for a deck to play in a Store Showdown. All 6 of those lists would be solid choices. Yeah.
Well. I feel prepared. Now I want to go play games.
Yeah, me too. I just want to get some games in. I gotta do that. I haven't gotten to play as many games this set, so it's time to grind a little bit before the Store Showdowns if I want some of those promos.
Yeah. I mean, I still have to get talked out of playing my red green Jabbo list because I keep doing somewhat well with it.
I am all for pet lists. Like I've been messing with a double command Boba 2 list right now. That is kind of it's one of those things where it's fun enough to be dangerous. It's fun enough to make me want to bring it, and then I usually regret it. I'm like, I could be playing Sabine ECL right now, but sometimes you just got to win on your terms. Sometimes you got to be a Johnny instead of a Spike. If you're familiar with the old archetypes, yeah. Well, anything else to add before we close this thing out?
I don't think so.
All right.
I wish I had something clever. I was just saying, I wish I had something clever, but honestly, I'm just like excited to be sitting upright again. So
I believe that. Yeah. Well, as you make me want to like stretch my back now, and like, but I shout out to all our patrons out there. Shout out to everybody in our Discord. If you're not in our Discord, definitely go join it. There's a merch store as well. If you go to icecaveradio.com, check that out. We've got great shirts, and you should wear them. And they have QR codes, so you can be at events, and people will be like, where'd you get that awesome shirt? You can be like, icecaveradio.com. If you scan this QR code on the shoulder, I don't have one. This isn't one of the shirts right now. But you'll go there, too, and become a better person. So definitely check that out, too. Until next time, we'll get the next Conquer the Cave episode out soon as well. And a lot more content around some of the spoilers and things that have been appearing for Twilight of the Republic 2. There's a lot of fun stuff to check out with that. So look forward to that content in the near future as we get back on track a little bit here. In the meantime, I think the Discord is the best thing we got going here. This podcast is good. The channel is nice, but the Discord community, I think that we've been able to put together through this show is really kind of the best thing from this, in my opinion. So be a part of it.
My greatest regret is that I have pretty terrible service for cell at work, so I can't be as active in the Discord as I want, especially during the day, because that's usually when I seem to have my best ideas, and then I want to talk about it, and I can't.
You got to write it down for later.
I know.
All right. Well, until then, play us out, Charmer, with your golden droid voice.
May the Force be with you.